Hi and welcome or welcome back to Architects Not Architecture. We are with you live from Hamburg, Germany. My name is Fermín Tribaldos and I will be your host today. If you are new to the community, welcome. It's amazing to see a list of participants with over 2,000 architects from more than 90 countries joining us today. We really appreciate your interest and we are very happy that you are here. We started this virtual world tour in November to celebrate our 5th anniversary. With this event series, we are taking you on a tour around the globe to meet some of the most influential architects of our time and get to know them on a personal level. Today, we are taking you to the States, where we will have the greatest honor to talk to Stephen Holl and Elizabeth Diller, who will join us live from New York. Our next 2 stops will be the Netherlands on March 10th and China on March 24th. You can visit our website to find more detailed information and register. There, you can also watch our past virtual events on demand. But make sure you do it later and not now. Let's focus and enjoy the next 1.5 hours together.
At Architects Not Architecture, we do not focus on architectural projects, but on the individuals who designed and built them. We often know the projects and awards of renowned architects, but what we often miss out on are the people behind them. It is them and their unique personal history which influence how they work and what they create. So we try to bring to the stage what too often remains unseen. Today, our speakers will talk about their career paths, their influences, and the experiences that shaped them and made them become who they are today. And the main rule is, they are not allowed to talk about their own projects.
We would like to mention and thank all of those who make these events possible. From our team, we would especially like to mention Kim and Fran, who are the magicians that are editing this live stream. This event is kindly supported by Mosa and Skyframe. We have video messages from them, and let me start by passing from Mosa.
Hello everyone, my name is Joe Fazio and I'm an architectural sales consultant for Mosa Tile supporting both the New York and New Jersey markets. I would love to be with you all in person during today's event, but of course that's not possible. While my hope is that many of you have heard of Mosa, for those of you who have not, I can assure you we are not new. We've been producing porcelain and ceramic tiles for floors, walls, and terraces for more than 135 years. As an introduction to Mosa and to provide you with some more information about our company, I would like to show you the following video.
Connecting series that form the heart of its ceramic tile solutions, Mosa presents Core Collection. With this range, architects and designers can create signature surfaces with countless design options in the most intuitive way. The Core Collection makes it easy to choose the appropriate tile for any project. The selection process is simple and efficient. Core Collection connects the 3 beloved series, solids, terra and quartz, partly by adding new colors that enable more aesthetic blends of different series. Color options range from light to dark, neutral to striking, and warm to cool. New colors that offer contemporary trend interpretations have been added to the mix. Textures range from layered to powdery and robust, spanning a wide variety of choices. The QR code can be scanned for more product details. New in Mosa's portfolio and part of Core Collection are innovative modular shapes. With this, Mosa adds a new dimension to surface design by offering endless design possibilities. Mosa also offers an extensive variety of set combinations in balanced patterns of colors, textures, sizes and shapes. These patterns can be used as offered and further customized by colors and textures. Designers can compose together their own mix and match selection from across all series. The creative journey enters a new level of creative freedom. One where architects and designers can create signature surfaces with countless design options in the most intuitive way. Core Collection. Signature surfaces made easy.
We would also like to mention our media partners, Design Boom, Architizer, ArchDaily, Archinect, and Basler, and also our broadcast partner for China, Position. Today we are welcoming our speakers, Stephen Holl and Elizabeth Diller. Each of them will have 30 minutes on our virtual stage, 20 minutes to give a talk, followed by a 10-minute interview. After the two talks, we will have a round of discussion where we will ask some of your questions, so make sure you get ready and use the box on our website to send in your questions. You will find it on the right side when scrolling down. That's the plan for today, and before we start, let me pass the mic to our partner Nick from Skyframe.
Hi, I'm Nick Newman, CEO of Skyframe based in Los Angeles. We are happy to sponsor this event called Architects Not Architecture, featuring the well-known architects Stephen Holl and Elizabeth Diller. Skyframe was founded in 2002 and has established itself as the world's leading slimline sliding door system. We have positioned ourselves among developers and architects as an international supplier of thermally broken sliding door systems. Our family-owned company, with its headquarters and manufacturing plant in Switzerland, produces tailor-made architecture concepts and living spaces a reality around the world, and to its brand promise offers its client a view, not a window. Many of our clients refer to our award-winning system as the best engineered product with the most individual options. With the opening of our US branch in 2014, Skyframe Inc. and the support of our certified dealer has already achieved a significant market share in the US with hundreds of successful completed projects all over North America, Canada and the Caribbean, and over 9,000 projects worldwide. Skyframe offers a wide range of products. To name just a few, we offer classic, plain arc, slope, pivot and hurricane impact certified sliding doors. To find out what makes us so unique, please feel free to contact us.
Our first speaker was born in Bremerton, Washington. He studied architecture in Washington, Rome, and London. Right after his graduation in 1977, he established his own practice, Stephen Holl Architects. Today, he is considered one of America's most influential architects. He is well known for his ability to blend space and light with great contextual sensitivity and to utilize the unique qualities of each project to create a concept-driven design. He has been recognized with architecture's most prestigious awards and prizes. His long list of renowned projects include, for example, the Kiasma Museum in Helsinki, Simmons Hall in Boston, the Horizontal Skyscraper in Shenzhen, the Henning Museum of Contemporary Art in Denmark, and the Linked Hybrid in Beijing. In addition to this, he founded a foundation focused on the arts, education, design, and ecology in 2010. He is also tenure professor at Columbia University's Graduate School of Architecture. It's a huge honor for us to have him with us today. Welcome, Stephen Holl.
Hello, everyone from Rhinebeck, New York, where it's about 30 degrees and snow on the ground. And I have a presentation that I'm very grateful for, from Marissa for putting this together, 30 slides, and I'll just start. It goes, and by the way, I couldn't do the whole time. I'm stopping in 1993, but this is 1944. This is my father. This is where it starts, of course, with your parents. My father was a paratrooper, and he was in the 104th Airborne Division. He jumped 64 times, and he was an instructor. And during the war, he gave jump shows across the country to sell war bonds. And finally, in 1945, he was on a mission from San Diego to invade Japan. And that was the same time, August 6, 1945, the bomb was dropped. So my dad then was on an occupation assignment in 1946. And he came back to Manchester, where I was born, and he brought back Japanese lacquerware, bowls, trays, kimono, wood platform shoes, two-toed white socks. So for when I was a child, Japan was a mystery. In fact, that was my mind, kind of moved more toward Japan. My parents were married for 66 years, and I was born in Manchester. My mom was born in Shawmut, Alabama, and my dad was born in Mukilteo, Washington. And when my mom was pregnant with me in Manchester, she had a job collecting tickets on the Manchester-Seattle ferry. This was a beach house on Puget Sound. She could see the ferry coming from the front windows of our beach house and would run down the boardwalk to collect tickets when the ferry arrived. That's the sort of family. 3/4 of them were Norwegian, related to my dad's family. And the origin of my name is kind of strange. My grandfather was born, my dad was full-blooded Norwegian. And my grandfather was born in Tønsberg, Norway. And his name was Christopher Ole with an umlaut over the O, Olhole. And when he was immigrating in the immigration line, the one of the guards told him, you have to put your last name first, and there was not so many spaces on that form. So the name was Hole, Christ. And that's the guard said, "Holy Christ, you can't have a name like Holy Christ. Get out of line and change your name." So my grandfather couldn't speak English, and he changed, with the help of the guy in front of him who was Norwegian that could speak English. He changed the name he dropped the umlaut and changed the name to Holl. So it's a kind of Kafka-esque bureaucratic beginning of a name. That was after Manchester. We moved to 2021 13th Street, Bremerton, Washington. And that house is still there. You can see it. And that's where I spent, 1952 until I graduated from high school. And that to me was a big house. But when I look at it now, I can hardly believe that's where I grew up. My dad started a company called Service Heating and Sheet Metal, where I worked when I became 14. And my mom worked in the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. In the back of that house was a bank of dirt. And my brother, who's 2 years younger than me, and I would play a game we called Property. We would dig in the dirt. We would make little buildings and roads. We had some toy cars. And we got so excited about that work of making that we would go out there before breakfast. And my mom would, in the summertime, my mom would call us back in for breakfast. And as we got older, we built 3 different tree houses and clubhouses. One was a 2-story tree house. One was a clubhouse underground that was covered with an old rug on logs and dirt. And years later, when I was teaching at Columbia University, I used to say to the first-year students, there's 4 kinds of architecture: under the ground, in the ground, on the ground, and over the ground. And I realized that I had these ideas when I was kind of 10 years old back in 1955. We always drew. And in fact, when my dad was still alive in 2014, we had an exhibition called Holl's Drawing. Andrew McNair helped make the catalog, and you can see that's my dad's drawing on the cover of the poster there. So he could draw, and he loved to draw. And I think, when you're a child and your father draws and your brother draws, that's part of our life. In fact, when I was 13, I entered my oil painting. I had an oil painting set given to me by my parents, and they set me up in the basement so I could paint because it smelled, the oil paint smelled. And the only place I could take this in that little town of 30,000 people was the Kitsap County Fair that happened every August. And at the Kitsap County Fair, you could get an award for the largest pumpkin, the best cow, the finest goat. And they also had a section for painting. And I won 2 blue ribbons. And I think that really encouraged me to be an artist. And that was the main building in the town. Puget Sound Naval Shipyard had this hammerhead crane, and you could see it from everywhere. In fact, the Bremerton Sun newspaper had it on the masthead as the image of the town. And that has a kind of 4-story building as a counterweight. It was for lifting superstructures on to aircraft carriers under construction and dry docks. And I think somehow that image got into my work, my later work. My dad's sheet metal shop was a place where I worked from 14 until 17. And I could do duct work, working with 24 gauge, 28 gauge galvanized. And after hours, I would make sheet metal sculpture. And I think I made this in 1963, and I still have it. But my dad was a tough boss. We had to dig oil tank holes for 300-gallon oil tanks for every residential house. The holes were 4 feet wide, 6 feet long, and 6 feet deep. And sometimes there was hard pan dirt there, and we had to use a pick to get down. But one day I had a really soft soil, and I dug the whole hole by 11:30. My dad stopped by and stopped by and stood over the hole. I was standing in the bottom, and I said, "Look, I'm finished." And my dad said, "Good, you can dig another one after lunch." That's the kind of boss he was. But they were great parents. They would do whatever my brother and I wanted to do. So we convinced them to drive the whole California coast and take us to go surfing. In fact, we convinced them to buy a 1963 Grand Prix Pontiac 2-door hardtop. And all the way down, we're playing the Beach Boys, Surf City, and other kinds of music like that. On that trip, I remember stopping on Highway 1, Big Sur, and we stopped at a restaurant called Nepenthe, and it was built it's still there. It was built in 1949 by Rowan Maiden, who was a intern of Frank Lloyd Wright. So I was very inspired by the angled roof and the redwood construction, and I think probably it was my first experience in architecture. And I grew up, like every kid in Bremerton, with hot rod cars. And here's my dad with and that's labeled wrong, 1939 Chevrolet Coupe, which I built behind the garage when I was 15. And the day I turned 16, December 9th, I drove that out from behind the garage, December 9th, 1963. And after that, I traded it for a 1931 Model A Ford with a 283 V8 Chevrolet engine. There were only 4 bolts holding the body onto the frame. The day I drove that to the house, my mom cried. And in fact, you can see 2021 13th Street on the left photograph in the back there, that little green house. And I left the engine running and it rattled all the windows in the house. So I put it for sale, and in a few days I sold it to 5 sailors. Bremerton was a military town, and when the ships were in, the sailors would run the town. I played pulling guard on the football team in high school, and this is called the West High Wildcats, and this is the awards at the end of the year. I got the inspirational award. And if you can see on the lower right, I had a broken left arm. I broke my left arm in about the third game, but I still managed to get the inspirational award. When I got to the University of Washington, I went directly into the University of Washington. I never had second thoughts. I wanted to go into architecture. I really, in a way, I was inspired by only one professor, and it was Professor Herman Punt. And he gave lectures he gave a kind of theory course where he took you through the history of what he said is, this is the history of modern architecture. It begins with Brunelleschi. It begins in Florence with the Duomo. Why? Because here the construction has a tension ring. And he said, that's the beginning of modern architecture. And then he took us from there, he took us to Schinkel in Berlin and all the way through Schinkel's work. And then he took us to Louis Sullivan and the Chicago School, every building of Louis Sullivan. There was a Macintosh lecture on the Glasgow School of Art. And then he went to Frank Lloyd Wright, and the last sort of 10 lectures were all the work of Frank Lloyd Wright. And I remember the end, and that was it. And when I graduated, I never had any information on Le Corbusier or anybody else. That was his idea of what is modern architecture. But I had a professor in landscape that really was inspiring, Richard Haig. I remember he gave this lesson with blue books, and he told everybody to write what you do before you start to do your landscape design. And you could write, 500 words. And one guy wrote 3 words, and he showed it to the whole class. He said, this. He was a very Zen instructor. Almost amazing. That's where I think I.
Sorry, Stephen, I think we lost you for a couple of seconds. You can repeat that with your professor, the hack.
Oh, his word was, as a landscape architect, you must be the site. Rome was amazing. That was a very important moment in my life. And I remember Herman Punt, encouraging me to go to Rome. It was the first program of the University of Washington. I'd never been to Europe, and he gave me, in my mailbox, he gave me a Goethe quote: "Rome is a city where one can spend a lifetime in Pythagorean silence and still not know it." And I said, I have to go to Rome. So there, Oscar Zarina was the only teacher, and she arranged for Ed Weinstein and myself to have this little apartment, Via Denari. It's still there, Via Denari 6 in Rome. And it had no windows. It was at the bottom of a light well. So you could, if you wanted to see what the day was, you had to look up this shaft of a light well. But it was right behind the Pantheon. So every day I would go, and I had an agreement with the guard there. And I said, I'm a student, please, can I come in before the tourists? So he would let me in, and I would then check and analyze and look at how the light would change. Every day of the year, it's different. And as the seasons change, how that angle of the sun changes. It's a fantastic, actually, I've been going back to the Pantheon almost once a year ever since. Oscar Zarina was an amazing teacher, born in Riga, Latvia in 1929. She spoke 8 languages. She would go to the Vatican and translate the Pope's message on Sunday into Latvian and Lithuanian. But for me, as a teacher, she was very strict. She said, if you want to be an architect, first, you must learn to cook. So that's what I had to do. I cooked in her kitchen. I learned how to make spaghetti alla carbonara. I learned how to stir a wooden bowl, a wooden spoon with egg whites and salt and olive oil to make mayonnaise. So it was a kind of, it was an education via Oscar Zarina. And when I returned to America, it was the height of the Vietnam War. And I had been drafted back in December of 1969, they had the first lottery for people that would have to go into the service, no questions asked. So they said the first 150 numbers will have to go. And, that's your birth date. Out of 365, I drew number 47. And then at that time, I just closed my desk and I said, okay, I know what I have to do. And I began to write conscientious objection, 18 pages of text on philosophical grounds. Now, for those of you who know about the CO, the conscientious objector status, they don't accept anything other than religious grounds. But I filed this thing over and over to the draft board in Bremerton, Washington, which was a military town. I think I sent it registered mail over 10 times. And finally, about 1971, actually, it came back with no letter, just a draft card that said 4F, which is a physical deferment. And I never had a physical. And I said to my friends, I'm not going to accept this. I want my philosophical grounds conscientious objection. And my friend said, hey, accept it. They think you're crazy. That's a 4F. And for my last project at the University of Washington, my professor accepted my participation in this largest demonstration against the Vietnam War. There were 150,000 people in San Francisco. I hitchhiked from Seattle to San Francisco to be in the demonstration. And there were something like 500,000 in Washington, D.C. It was the largest ever demonstration opposing an American war. And I must say that to this day, I feel strongly that this courage to protest is important. And at that time, and I still feel at that time, it had it's what changed the direction of America at that time. So I was very fortunate to participate. And here we started a bookstore, William Stout Architecture Books. That's me behind the lamp there with the beard. And Bill Stout still has the bookstore in San Francisco. We started a little magazine, Pamphlet Architecture, and that was the first issue. Bridges, you can see San Francisco, ... New York. I had just arrived in New York. I came to New York on New Year's Eve, 1976, 1977, on an excursion ticket. And I only knew one person in New York, my brother. And I met him at the base of the Chrysler Building because I didn't know anything about the city. And he grabbed my other suitcase and we went off to a loft party in the Soho. And like immediately I was into New York City, and it was absolutely amazing. And the art scene. And I remember I met Andrew McNair at the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies. And it was a really cold winter. And I didn't have any money. And I had an army coat on. In fact, that's the army coat there in that photograph. And he said, dress in layers. That's how you can stay warm. So I went down and bought another army coat. And I wore that on top of this army coat. And this is on the High Line in 1979. You could sneak up there and walk around. And that's when I proposed the Bridge of Houses project. I don't think that's in here. We took that slide out. Anyway, that project from 1979, 1980, the model is in the Museum of Modern Art collection. And I'm very excited that the High Line exists. In fact, my office is at one end of it, and I live near the other end of it, so I can walk to work on the High Line, in better days. And this is a place I lived at 655 6th Avenue in an old department store. I had a cubic loft that was my office as well. And there you can see, you could come into the office where that zigzag stair is. There's a big door there. And you wouldn't know that I lived on that shelf above the entrance. I went to the YMCA at the end of the day at 6 o'clock to shower. And there was no hot water in that space. But it was all right. It was dedication to trying to start in architecture. And I always have taught. this was a teaching stint. I went back to the University of Washington in 1979. So you can see Oster's Arena, second from the left, Ed Weinstein, my colleague from Rome, Rem Koolhaas in the middle, Rem with hair, Folke Nyberg, and there's me, kind of cross-legged. And anyway, I've taught my whole life at different schools, Pratt, Parsons, Syracuse, and since 1982, Columbia University. This is a very important moment. Oops, sorry. In my life, I started with, a kind of a philosophy that began grounded in architecture, in morphology and typology, and I worked with it for a few years, and I felt it was a dead end. And I was on a train, a transcontinental train trip in 1984 from Toronto to Banff. And that's a transcontinental train that has to negotiate an elevation change in the mountains. And there's a thing called the spiral tunnel. And this is me giving a lecture describing what happened. But during that trip, I sat next to a professor of philosophy who talked to me about Merleau-Ponty and phenomenology for the whole trip. So in the end, I thought that's the direction I need to take. And I felt like I went into this spiral tunnel, kind of rationalist typologist, and came out a phenomenologist. And many times we were in competition with one another. Here's Tom Main, Michael Rotundi, and myself for the Berlin Library Competition, 1988. We're on the steps of the Schinkel's Altes Museum. And it's a project that was very dear to my heart, and it was taken away from me. After we won it, the building senator in Berlin came and basically, it's a long story, took it away by running another round in which I wouldn't win. However, this is a little out of sequence. My first wife was an art assistant to James Turrell. So we made many of James Turrell's light space models in my shop on Hudson Street. And this is Philip Johnson calling me up and saying, I want you to join me and go to Berlin. Can you do it? And I said, oh, well, yeah. I mean, what's the story? He says, I'll tell you on the plane. And then he said, be at the Concorde at 9:30 in the morning. I've never been on the Concorde. And anyway, I went out to the airport, got on the Concorde, flew to Berlin. And then this is Philip and me and Fritz Neumeier in Berlin in 1992. He wanted me to do a project there because he was angry that they pushed me out of the Berlin Library Competition. And he had a commission which never came through, but he was going to give me a little piece of it in front of his building. Anyway, nothing ever happened from that, but I've always collaborated with artists, and this is where I kind of drop off, because I'm going to skip from 1993 all the way to today, because I'm running out of time. I see I'm running short, right? I'm running short of time. But I would just say that I've always loved collaborating with artists, and Vito Acconci was a dear friend of mine, and we did the storefront together in 1993. And I'm very proud of that little tiny project where, in fact, Vito and I were so dedicated to do it that we gave our fee. We had a fee of $5,000 each, and we both donated that to the construction of the building. And I think in 2008, they rebuilt it. It was supposed to be a temporary facade, but they rebuilt it. And all my life, Zaha and I have been parallel to each other. I forgot to tell the story of the AA, where I went to school and was discovered by Elia Zengalis, and we were on the jury that in fact Zaha had just come from Leon Creer Studio, and Rem and I both leaned forward at the same time saying, what a brilliant project this is. And she had drawn it in pink magic marker with arches in it. And we always laughed about the way she began, but she was really came out of nowhere. And then at this point in her life in 1993, this was the Vitra fire station. She detailed everything. This was an amazing moment because finally she got something built. And we, at that point, both Zaha and I never thought that she would get a lot of things built. So the history was very strange and different. In fact, this is the end. This is 2016. I had to skip 23 years. This was taken 2 weeks before Zaha died in my apartment. There's my wife on the right, Dimitra, Io, Helene, Zaha. Zaha came to bring a little Issey Miyake dress for Io, and Tom Ing came that night too. We all went to dinner, and that's just the last year. On the left is Dimitra, my wife, who's also an architect. Little Thevos, who's 9 months old. Thevos Myron Holl, middle name same as my dad. That connects us back to the paratrooper. And Io Helene Holl and me, and that's a sculpture I did at Art Omai. And just to end, I want to say that one of the things that I've been doing, we have been doing together here in Rhinebeck, is T-Space, dedicated to poetry, music, painting, sculpture, and architecture. And this is the 10th year of T-Space. This is Ann Carson reading in 2016. We commission music and we commission poetry, and we have a program for architecture students, 6 students every July. So it's a very important part of what I do, is continuing teaching. And I just want to end with that slide, which is from the great poet Robert Kelly, for Dimitra, Io, Helene, the builders of minds to come. And if say that Robert Kelly has read at T-Space 3 different times, and he in fact wrote a poem. We commissioned a poem called Phases of the Earth that was the groundbreaking for the Ex-Of-In House. And the first time he read a poem called What I Really Want to Say from 2013. And I'll just read 3 sentences. What I really want to say is about poetry, always. Is about architecture, I mean music, yes. How can I tell them apart? I'll try. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for the presentation. As we needed to change our setup in our conversation, let me, Liz, turn off your camera, and we'll turn on later. Just 1 second.
Turn this off.
Okay, and now I need Marisa go outside of the conversation. Now, perfect. So it seems it worked. We needed to adapt to our connection, so we were using different devices for this conversation. Thank you, Stephen, for the wonderful presentation. You have so many things to say and to explain that I was thinking actually we need a second round, we need a second event for the second part of the story. You said you needed to stop at 1993. Yeah. So it's, as I mentioned before for the audience, it's a huge honor to have you participating. And we don't have much time for the interview, but let me start with the question that is for me the most important one. You have, so with amazing 50 years of practice, 40 years as a professor, and 11 years of the foundation, you have achieved so much. Of all that you have done, what is it that you are the most proud of?
I think you can see that in the last 3 slides, right? The builder of minds to come. I think it's very important to think about the future. And I'm very grateful to have had the chance to do what I've done, but I think we have to think about the future, especially in terms of this planet and what we're going to leave to future generations. So I'm very happy to be thinking about minds to come. And I continue to teach full time right now at Columbia University with Dimitra. Together we teach.
What is that motivates you the most about the future?
The fact that the young people are going to inherit everything that we've done, and we need to reset. I'm writing a text right now called Reset. And I believe that this year of pause is something that causes us to think. You know, I mean, when you have to stop what you're doing and sit and stay in your room or at your desk for a year, it causes you to rethink all the meanings, all the core values. And I think it's a positive, in a way, it's a positive thing for everybody on the planet. We're all in this together. And I think it's time to recalibrate. And I'm working on a text right now. I gave a lecture in Patras, Greece. What was it, 2 weeks ago? That we had a wonderful conversation afterwards about the problem of the pandemic and how do we live and what does it mean to us and what does it mean going forward. And I feel it could be something philosophically valuable.
Sounds very interesting. So you founded your foundation in 2010 with the purpose of uniting architecture, art, poetry, and music of our time, which is super interesting. We have one question from the audience, and this one question from one of our previous speakers. So I'm going to play a video for you, okay?
Okay.
Hi, Stephen Holl. My name is François Valentini, architect from Luxembourg. Since I was a young architect in the 80s, I was so impressed about your work. And over the years, I discovered that we have the similar way of working. As you, I love arts, I love to draw, and I created my own foundation. We promote the young artists from different fields. So my question is, what's your game? What you can learn from the arts? Maybe it's better I invite you at my place, which is in the middle of the vineyards, and we can discuss this topic with a good glass of wine. Much deeper and much more relaxed.
Yes, I take that invitation. Sounds good. But I learned from my daughter, for example, you know, she's 5 years old and she's obsessed with dinosaurs and she can name them. She has models, scale models of 48 dinosaurs, and she can name every one of the 48 dinosaurs. And they're from different periods. 66 million years ago, 150 million years ago. So I think when you think about the moment we exist today, this pause, maybe we need a big picture to look at a larger frame of time.
I would like, actually, that was one of our questions for you. So if having kids has changed you, and if so, how?
Yeah, I just answered it. It does.
Yeah, that's why.
Because the questions that you might have to answer you start to question deeper things that aren't, let's say, necessarily at the front of your mind. So I think the problem with an architectural practice is it puts a lot of garbage in your face, contracts and clients and things that are not necessarily philosophical at all, and it can fill up all your mind and all your time. So this is why I love to teach, because when we're in our studio, we're asking philosophical questions, deeper questions about core meanings and values, and I think that's very important. And I think the young people just naturally, intuitively ask those questions.
Stephen, that sounds super interesting, and we have many more questions also there. We've seen many questions coming from the audience, but maybe we can continue during the roundtable discussion if it's okay for you. Okay. We go ahead with Liz, and after that we have a conversation together. Okay. Good. Thank you, Stephen, for the nice presentation. We really enjoyed it. Thank you a lot.
Thank you.
Before we start with our second speaker, I want you to do something. I want you to pick up your phone, okay? Open Instagram and search architects, not architecture, or you can simply scan this code. Okay, architects, not architecture. Found it. Now press follow. That was it. Thank you for supporting us, and now you won't miss any of our upcoming events. Our second speaker was born in Poland and grew up in New York. She studied architecture at Cooper Union in New York. Together with Ricardo Scofidio, she founded her own practice in 1981. Diller Scofidio Renfro is a design studio whose practice spans the fields of architecture, urban design, installation art, multimedia performance, digital media, and print. With a focus on cultural and civic projects, their work addresses the changing role of institutions and the future of cities. They are recognized today as one of the most influential and internationally renowned practices. Some of their most relevant projects include the Blur Building, Lincoln Center, the High Line, the Shed, the expansion of MoMA, Tharaya Park in Moscow, or the upcoming London Center for Music. Her work has been distinguished twice with the Times 100 Most Influential People list and the first MacArthur Foundation Fellowship awarded in the field of architecture. In addition to this, she is a professor of architectural design at Princeton University. We are very honored to have her with us today. Welcome, Elizabeth Diller.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Hello, everyone. I wanted to begin someplace in the middle and actually make a hinge between Stephen and myself. I was just watching his presentation. This project of Stephen's Bridge of Houses was very, very important in my career. And I know that we're not allowed to show our work. We're allowed to show other people's work and influences. And this project made a huge difference in my life and the launch of the thinking out of the box when I was in school, and ultimately one of our most important projects, the High Line. So I'm going to advance here and say that I never really wanted to be an architect. And I'll explain that a little bit. But before I do that, I want to say something about how I grew up, where I grew up, and a little bit of my family history. So I was born in Poland, in Łódź, actually the same city that Danny Liebskin was born in. And when we compared notes, it turned out it was maybe 5 blocks away. But this is a photo before the war. And my parents were both Jewish, very secular. My father's Czech, my mother's Polish, and they survived the Holocaust. And this was a very important thing in my career and in my thinking, and the sensitivity I had about everything, and especially about loss. This is me in Poland, and you know, it's really a crazy assignment to do this without showing one's work, but the autobiographical temptation is really fantastic. So I indulged a little bit, and also like Stephen, I only ended up to a certain point in my life, because when you start doing this, it takes a while. So my family emigrated from Poland to the States in 1959. And on this ship, actually. And it was very difficult to leave Poland at the time. As Jews, we had to get exit visas. It took my parents a long time to get here. But when we got here, this is me and my mom at the New York World's Fair. And when we got to the States, my parents were very, very comfortable in Poland. And we lived very well. When we came to the States, my mother had to take a job cleaning office buildings. My father was unpacking groceries in a grocery store. So they had to really give up all of their possessions and start from scratch. And some of the earliest memories I have in the US was delivering seltzer and delivering newspapers with my brother. This is the apartment that we lived in, and my mother's in the middle next to me. My brother's next to me on the other side. Stephen and my brother are roughly the same age. They were born the same time. So that's the difference in ages between us. And I think that there was a real separation between me and others when I came to the States. He was a little bit too old to be my friend. And when kids that were immigrated from other countries came to New York at the time, they were put in slow learning classes. They called that retarded. At that time, that word retarded is no longer used. It's really a pejorative, but it's basically slow learning, and it's with kids with learning disabilities. So I was put in slow learning class, until about the third grade. So from first grade through third grade, I really didn't know what was going on. I didn't speak the language. I learned English from TV. And this was some of the stuff that I watched. It was mostly about suburban children, suburban families, these kinds of shows, Dennis the Menace and Leave It to Beaver. And it's all about happy kids. I was happy, but we were quite poor, and we lived in New York. This is some of the other stuff that I was watching, there's different, the cavemen and the future. So going back in time and forward in time. And I'm going to fast forward to high school and the 60s and the kind of engagement. Of course, after third grade, I really got involved in things. I was interested in many things. I was interested in art. But the spirit of the times was very, very important. It was all about freedom. It was all about, it was the women's movement. It was Vietnam. And this was really in my high school years where I started, I have to say I'm the beneficiary of all my antecedents that actually pushed for lots of freedoms that we enjoy. This was the high school I went to, and it was located it's called the High School of Music and Art. It's a specialty school for artists and musicians, and it sits right in the middle of City College. And City College was, you could see here, anti-war protests disrupt many high schools. And this was the case, that City College was constantly freeing the High School of Music and Art. So we were always, I don't remember really spending much time in school. We were liberated all the time. And I got a little bit of a sense of, I got political consciousness at that time. But I didn't really learn that much, but I was in this creative atmosphere. So I should say that very important, in my own biography, that my parents wanted me to be an architect, and I never wanted to be an architect. So for my parents, it was either an architect or a dentist. And I equated architecture with getting work on your teeth, with extractions and cavities and root canal. So it was not something I wanted to do, but I did want to be an artist. And that's why I went to the school. And here there's an order for City College of New York to reopen because it was constantly closed. While in high school, and while I was not in school, and besides, smoking a lot of marijuana and do whatever kids are doing in high school, I spent a lot of time here in the sculpture garden of the Museum of Modern Art, and also roaming around in their collection. And I was very drawn, and when we got the project to do the MoMA's expansion, it was always part of my life and what I thought about. There were some things that were very interesting for me and things that I visually loved and spaces that I visually loved, like this one. This is the inside of the Statue of Liberty. This is where you could see the nose and the lips and the structure. And here you could see the folds and the drapery of the dress. And I started to have this sort of three-dimensional consciousness because as I was interested in art, and this is Cooper Union, where I studied in the art school, I was extremely interested in becoming a filmmaker, a photographer and filmmaker at the time. I was interested in two dimensions with time, not space. And I always felt that architecture was morally corrupt and intellectually bankrupt. And so when I went to Cooper Union, I studied, this is one thing I wanted to show. This is at the very top of the screen is where I went to elementary school at Upper Manhattan, then junior high school, down a bit, and then high school right at 135th Street, and then college down at the bottom. And for some reason, I don't really know what this means, but it was a Southern trajectory for me after arriving in the US. When I was in Cooper Union, I was very influenced by the artists and filmmakers that were there. And one of them was Hollis Frampton. And his work was very interesting. It was American avant-garde, and he was a pioneer of digital art as well, and non-linear structural films. So this was part of my interest. I was also interested in the work of Hans Haacke, who was teaching in the school, and Haacke was working with these beautiful atmospheres and the airborne mist and so forth. And some of this really rubbed off on me. This was earlier than when I was in school, but his work was very, very important, especially the institutional critique, which really became very much a part of my life. When I was in Cooper Union, I ran into this man, John Haydock. And I was very interested in a course in the architecture school called Architectonics. I thought, what did that mean? Maybe I'll take the course. And I met him, and then I started to become really intrigued by him. He is a real guru figure. His early work was very formal here, based on Mondrian, and his work changed over time. This is the studio at Cooper Union, and it was just a big loft space, very open, and the shop facilities that were, I made a lot of things. What was important about that education was there was things that were censored and things that were okay. So Corbusier was okay, but Venturi was censored. And I had to read Complexity and Contradiction. I had to leave it in a drawer under my desk and not let anybody see that I was reading it. But Alto was okay. Mies was not so okay. Frank Lloyd Wright was not okay. And other architects, forget it, not very okay. This was a time when I was in school where CBGB's was really sort of the downtown scene was really big, and alternative way of life. There was a lot of drugs at the time, a lot of music, and alternative practices and everything. I became interested in certain artists. So while I was in architecture school, I was actually more drawn to people like Gordon Matta Clark and his work. And his form of disobedience was truly interesting because he rejected the market, he rejected typical exhibitions in galleries, and it was part of the institutional critique. And it also exposed me to a sort of a different conflation between drawing and three-dimensional space. 2D and 3D started to come together, and this was very interesting. There was a point where he was also blowing out windows. And this brings me to this coincidence when I was in school at Cooper Union, where I was also attending the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies, and this was a place for architectural exchange. You could see Peter Eisenman in the left, and Tony Vidler in the upper right, and other luminaries throughout. There was also an interesting coincidence because Gordon Matta Clark was invited to have an exhibition at the Institute, which was on 40th Street. And he ended up doing a project like this. He blew out the windows of the Institute instead of doing the show as he was, as it was discussed. Andrew McNair comes up three times now in this discussion. And he was the curator of the exhibition. And Gordon Matta Clark put these photographs of these various blowout windows in the windows that he blew open at the Institute. And that really affected me. There were other artists that were very important in this sort of discovery of space and 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions. Trisha Brown and sort of these gravity inverting projects were very, very important to me. Vito Acconci comes up again as well. This following project that I love, the mapping of following people throughout town. And this was performance art, really the beginning of performance art, and something that really inspired me heavily. The work of Steve Reich and also Full Glass was at the time, while I was in school, really important. But this one, where I have this guy that's circled in red, was actually more of an inspiration than any of the faculty in the school. He was a student also in the School of Architecture. This is when I transferred. I didn't mention that I transferred to the School of Architecture because I was so interested in John Haydock and his thinking. But one of my classmates was this guy, Steve Chambers, and he was one of the musicians at Steve Reich. And he exposed me to a lot of the stuff that was going on downtown. This is John Haydock in his later years and his later work. So it started off very formal. It ended very narrative. And there were many people that needed to see psychiatrists and psychologists after being at Cooper. I didn't. I felt very secure, but I knew how much of John Haydock to take and not to take. It was at Cooper Union that I met Rick Scofidio, who became my partner. He was my teacher first, then he became my husband and my partner in practice. And then came Charles Renfro, and then came Ben Gilmartin and our office in New York, and that's what it looks like today. Alvin Boyarsky was very much in my consciousness at that time. Just when I left school, Alvin was running the AA, and it exposed me to another side of the world. It was my first public lecture that I did there with a glass of vodka that he gave me because I was so nervous. At this time, I'm just going to show you some things that inspired me. I'm not sure where I am on time, but I was interested in things that were really too big and things that were too small. This Tempietto, when I was in Rome at the American Academy of Rome, I discovered this little Tempietto, which I thought was so interesting. And it made me realize that, in photographs, buildings look very different than in real life. And I started to become very interested in scale. I became really interested in sort of satire, but also in glass. And Jacques Tati and Playtime was my favorite film of all time. It continues to be my favorite film. And but it gave me a consciousness about glass and about the optimism of glass, and then about voyeurism and paranoia with glass. This is a film of Atomy Goyen, which is called Family Viewing. It's one of the earliest films that I remember. We became good friends afterwards, but this was all about surveillance, family surveillance. And film was always very, very important to me. David Lynch, the banal, the banality and the scariness of banality and the everyday was always very important. This is from Blue Velvet. And a filmmaker that, I have fewer architectural idols, but I have more filmmaker idols. So Stanley Kubrick was very important. I love the way he thought. I love the way his indexical way of doing things. This is his research on hats for Clockwork Orange. Malcolm McDowell ended up wearing that bowler hat. But all of his work, this is from The Shining, the very creepiness of twinning, which became an obsession for me, twins of all sorts. I couldn't leave that. So this was also about twinning. This is from Peter Greenaway, and was another filmmaker that I watched a lot, with also indexical structures. Like, these are a film about windows where people died, people jumped out of windows, or people fell out of windows. And another film about death from Peter Greenaway, this is Death on the Seine, about all of these bodies from the morgue and from the Seine. Peter Greenaway was a big influence, as was Alain Resnais, and this film last year at Marienbad. And then came all of the land art. I was very interested in, large scale things that were atmospheric, the Walter de Maria, and all of this stuff. And Fujiko no Kaya and the expo in Osaka was also very inspirational. This is where I really got into atmospheres, and the Blur building really was a direct descendant from this interest in atmospheres and large environmental projects. And this is also an interesting intersection with Hubert Damisch, who was very consequential in my thinking and reading about perspective and about painting and about two-dimensional, three-dimensional space and sort of this non-dimensional space. I was also interested in performance. Worcester Group, who we ended up doing work with. This is some of the work of Worcester Group. That's Willem Dafoe, a young Willem Dafoe before he became a movie star. And I was also interested in pneumatics and farm and archigram and the work of Banham. And then these two guys with cigars. And for two reasons. I don't know how close I am to running out of time, but I wanted to say something about both of them. Duchamp, for many reasons, and Cedric Price. So Duchamp, I studied this piece for many years, and I ended up working with Rick doing a project on this. But what I loved about this painting, it was a painting and a sculpture, but it was also a book. And so he was working on parallel tracks with writing and illustration and a manual for how to make that painting that lasted many years, 10 years or so, and the visual. And he invented tools. Like, this was French curve that he derived from a chance operations of dropping a meter-long string from a meter in the air. And so this became a tool, which became a painting, which then became part of the large glass. He collected dust also. And that was a photo of Man Ray, of Duchamp's large glass and collecting dust. And then he also made miniatures. So the very idea that your work isn't finished when it's finished, but you have, there are many iterations and manifestations of work, and this is in miniature in a suitcase. And Cedric Price, and this is maybe the most important influence for me architecturally, the rethinking in double our past, thinking really out of the box about new programs, and Potteries Think Belt was important, but also was Fun Palace, and that led directly to the shed. So Fun Palace was conceived for a future that no one knew what it was going to be. And so it was the ultimate flexible building. And here are just, but what I also loved about Price is the way that he made his programs. Here you see individual activities on the left, group activities on the right. And then he starts to make these charts about the intersections of, let's say, knitting and shopping, or washing and reading, or and where there's it's a compatibility index. So he knows when a program is compatible. And he used this with the cybernetics experts that were working with him to evolve the program, which was really interesting and strange. And of course, the building, which went on for many, many years on 2 different sites and almost became real, evaporated. This very last thing that I wanted to show is just a couple of slides. Lincoln Center was a kind of transition in my life and in the life of the studio. And this came at about the same time as the High Line, and I'm very late to architecture. So this was around 2003 that we were asked to participate in a competition, and about 2004 or 2003 also for the High Line. So both of these projects started at the same time. And this building was built in the 60s. It was designed in the 50s. Philip Johnson was one of the designers, and it was full of stars. And it was these guys, there's a lot of testosterone, very male. This is the original model that they made. And when I got into this project at the beginning, we won by accident, I think. And then when we began to work, we realized that the visions that we had, we really couldn't execute. They were permanent, and they were in the city, and they were large and expensive. And we had to convince many, many people. And there is this a notion. This is from Thomas Edison. Something like genius is something like 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. And I sort of took that as a kind of interesting motto that there was so many meetings. Here we are in the middle, DSNR, and we had to work with all the federal and city agencies, all the stakeholders at Lincoln Center. There were 12 of them. They had to all agree on every change there. And this became a huge project. We were in the middle of many projects at Lincoln Center. It was over 10 years. But what was really important was that I had to convince so many people about the merit of the work that we did all over, that ended up being a huge project for us and made me mature personally, that it was 1% drawing and 99% convincing people to do the right thing and to do something that would be good, but they were close to it because people don't like change. But that 99% was just as creative as the 1% of the drawing and sketching and imaging. And so that was really important. And then another important project for us, fundamental, was Museum of Modern Art, which just opened in 2019. And it comes with a whole history. Actually, it was founded in 1929 during the Depression, and its first home was a building on 53rd Street, and then it moved from Fifth Avenue to 53rd Street, and then came the Goodwin and Stone building, and then the Philip Johnson expansion, and then the Pelly, and then the Taniguchi at the end, and then we came at the very end. And so this was the history of the site with all these different architects. And the reason I show this was that in the process of doing this project, we had to take down the building of one of our colleagues. One of our colleagues, Todd Williams and Billy Chen, and we got a lot of heat internationally for this. We were very universally hated for having to take this down. It was one of the low points of my life, but I realized that it wasn't our decision really. It was to make the museum functional. And so, but that was very, very important life lesson for me. And the very last thing was the Shed, very, very important project. That was it was a response to an RFP that was put out by the city. And we put forward, without a client, an institution, very much like Cedric Price, an institution and a building connected to each other from scratch. and worked on it before there was a client for 6 years until it became real. And that is it. So I'm going to, we can stop sharing. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm going to stop your presentation. Thank you, Liz, for the presentation. It's fascinating to be able to know more about you from a different perspective and know about your influences. I think it took longer than we expected with the presentation, so we need to keep the interview so as short as possible. And we have a long list of questions, but I'm going to ask one from the audience because it's related to what you have said just at the end. Have there been times in your career that you have felt discouraged or defeated, or my bad pronunciation, sorry, defeated?
You know, I have to say that I was always, you know, disappointment is structured into the life of an architect, right? It's just part of our everyday. So we do competitions, we win 1 out of 10 competitions if we're lucky. We're defeated all the time. So, so it's just part of the everyday. But I feel like you know, we've been able to do so many things and imagine so many new things. But when something is, if it's my fault, it's not, you know, it's not a problem. I feel a little bit defeated if it's out of my hands. Like we just was just announced that the Centre for Music in London for the LSO is not going to go forward because Brexit and COVID, and that's when I feel defeated because it's out of my hands.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can understand that feeling. Actually, as we were listed in Time 100, Ellie Broad said she can do the impossible. Do you agree with that?
I'm not sure entirely the impossible, but I have no sense of fear when it comes to architecture. And when I feel passionate about something, I just go for it. And in the case of Eli Broad, some architects have collapsed along the way. I was very straightforward with Eli. He was a scary client, and I just pushed for what I thought was going to be right. And it's the same thing with all of our projects, like the Shed, for example. Just did it, you know, and it would come out and I sort of feel like it's very important to do things that you're totally unqualified to do because you're most passionate about those things and you're too naive to know that it could be a problem, you know, and so you push.
It might help.
Yeah.
What would you advise other architects to do in order to turn visions into projects?
I think what's important and what I did early on is I never really stopped imagining. You know, I did projects that were in various different forms, sometimes on paper, sometimes in public space, because I felt they needed to be done and not because I wanted recognition or because it would lead to anything. So the perseverance to build your work in some way, if you steal a site or borrow a site, or even if you publish something, or that you put yourself out there and you don't wait for the opportunity, you just steal it. And so, yeah, I feel that's the most important thing. The second thing I want to say that I think is really important is to not just you know, throw bombs from afar, you know, like grenades. This is what I used to do. But I decided that if you go into the center and not stay at the periphery, you can actually get things done because you can work with the government. We worked with the city government, with the Bloomberg administration to realize the High Line, for example. You know, this was very important. And it helps when there's an alignment of a administration with your goals. You know, that's very open-minded, and that one was. But as much as you can have a seat at the table with the grown-ups, you do that.
That sounds good. That went well also in Madrid, right? A few weeks ago with a competition. We have a question from the audience, and it's also a previous speaker of Architects Not Architecture. So let me play the video for you.
Okay.
Hi, Liz. You come from New York, which is for our generation, the city where everything used to come from, where everything used to happen before elsewhere. And I'm curious of your opinion of what's going to happen to New York, what's going to become of New York in the near future. And I dare to ask another bit more personal question, not too architectural, but somehow related. If you were to pick to choose a city to live in other than New York, where would you go and live?
Okay, that was from Fermin Vasquez, who is my collaborator in the Renasca project in Madrid, and we're going to do this giant project, public space, very similar to Lincoln Center and when it was built, but this is a commercial area, and of course, I mean, you probably know better than me, but New York, the future of New York. New York is a very real estate oriented city, and every square foot, every square meter is worth tons. So it's very important for architects to protect public space for public use and cultural use. And so I think that the future of New York is every little piece of property is going to be eaten up unless we manage to steal it and get administrations to be interested in preserving space for the public. Like the High Line is a great example of how that happened, because it would have been torn down. The previous mayor, under pressure from developers, signed a court order to demolish it. And it was saved at the last minute with a change of mayors. So this is very important because New York is very difficult. In terms of where I would want to live, I love Los Angeles, and the Broad was in Los Angeles, and I understood a different side of Los Angeles than Rayner Banham, which was my first introduction. But it's very perverse. It's a very perverse city. But it's one that wants to be more of a city. But my second city, I think, would be London. And
London.
Yes, because I feel very connected to London. And even though there are many cities I spend time in, London somehow has maybe it's because of the history of the AA and my connection to academia, which is still there. I should mention, just like Stephen, I've not ever not taught. So since I graduated, I started teaching in just about a year or two after graduating. And now I'm teaching at Princeton on the full-time faculty. But this is very much part of my life. But so I think there's something.
LA or London, right?
Yeah, LA
Liz,
and London.
do you mind if we get Stephen in this conversation, because I think this question is also an interesting question for him as well. So, Stephen, what do you think is going to be the future of New York? What is your vision? What's going to be with New York?
I think it might become affordable. I think the sort of collapse of real estate a little bit is a healthy thing. It was way over inflated, and now it's a lot of empty storefronts, and maybe artists could live in New York again. I mean, maybe there could be a kind of, instead of retail, a sort of storefront, artists, collaborative, occupational things. I think that it was becoming unaffordable for everyone, and this year of COVID has maybe recalibrated in a positive way. And I think they learned how to live on the street more, cafes outside, close half the streets. There's a lot of things that the city could learn from closing for a year. So, I don't think New York will ever die. It's like a history. It's like Rome, okay? Rome, Rome was sacked, right? And but it's still alive. You know, it's going to go on. It's just going to take a different form. When I came to New York in 1977, in January, the president then was Gerald Ford, and New York was bankrupt. And on the Daily News, it says, Ford says to New York, drop dead. I remember that front page. And the city was completely, you know, there used to be subway cars that were black, empty. All the lights are out. And my brother was the only person I knew in the city. He said, don't get on the train between any of those cars because you're gonna get robbed. And there was graffiti everywhere. But it was very cheap. My loft was $250 a month. I had a big cubic, I had 20-foot square and a little panhandle entrance, and it was $250 a month. For 10 years, I paid $250 a month. You know, those days are over, but maybe they'll come back.
But Stephen, you know, I think this era in the 70s, when you came to New York and when I was at Cooper, this was when New York was incredibly interesting. It was dangerous, and there was a lot of crack addicts in the street, and I had to step over people all the time to get from my apartment to school. But it was a time that there was so much creative energy. And it was because real estate was cheap and artists were moving into all the lofts, and it was really a fantastic place of production. What happened in the interim, in like the 80s, 90s, 2000s, New York progressively became a place of consumption, and all the artists left. They went to Brooklyn, they went to Staten Island, they went to New Jersey, Jersey City. My whole staff lives in Brooklyn. I'm sure yours, Stephen, also. Nobody can afford to live in Manhattan anymore. But this notion, and I think you and I are different kind of optimists and pessimists. Like my optimism is New York will rebound totally, that it will come back. But my pessimism is it's going to come back in the form of it's a developer city and not, maybe we have a break right now because of, all the storefronts are empty and there is a kind of, the retail apocalypse, which hit us actually before COVID because of Amazon. And so there is this ground floor that has to be reinvented. And that's something very, very interesting. But whether artists are going to come back for the long run, I don't know.
Liz, I have to ask you a question. I was trying to remember when I met you, and I think I met you at Art on the Beach in 1979 when my brother was invited to do an art piece next to yours. Isn't that where we met?
Yeah, you're right. I just remember. Yeah, I didn't think about that. Your brother, Jim.
And then I followed your work. I remember you worked. You did some art, some installations at La Mama Theater with the rotary disc thing. What was that called?
The rotary notary and his hot plate.
Yeah, no, I remember coming down there, and so yeah, we have the kind of beginning 1979, 1980, 81, 82.
Yeah, and it was also the storefront, because when the storefront moved from the East Village to where it has been,
Kenmore Street, right?
Kenmore, where you did your installation with Vito, and Vito was like such a also an inspiration. So this was we connected at many points along the line
on the art world,
art world, and we did our very first show at the Kenmore location. The very first show was our show called Body Buildings, when Herbert Muschamp.
I remember.
Yeah. And this was a time when Herbert Muschamp was writing, before he was writing for the New York Times, he brought his class to the show. And I remember his class at Parsons. And I think I showed them what architecture could be. And I think he said they all quit his course because they didn't understand anything about what architecture was. So, but there was the first, because art and architecture were connected. And in your worlds and in my worlds, even though you became an architect faster than I did earlier, but there was a complete interdisciplinary sort of feeling about things, and a little bit different than it is today, where everyone is in their lane. But
that's what I think we need to work on. That's why that's what we do at T-Space, and I do in my class and my teaching, and I think it's a good area to work towards recalibrating the connection. I think that's a positive dimension to work on.
Actually,
right?
that was one of the questions we had for you, with fits for you both, because this is something you had in common. Do you think architects are currently missing out on this interdisciplinary exchange? Or is there something our architects should be spending more time on?
I'm spending a lot of time on it because we have the T-Space, or which we're having, 3 exhibitions per summer season, and I teach a class called Architecture Apropos Art. We teach a studio class called the Architectonics of Music. Maybe it's one of my main areas of focus. I don't mean that exclusively, but I think that it's an area. I believe that architecture became too commercial. There's way too much, there's been more mergers in architecture firms in the history of the field of architecture. There are firms of 6,000 people, 3,000 people, 250 people, is supposed to be when Lou Kahn died, there were 16 people in his office. I was there, the year that he died. I was hired to work there, and I couldn't go to work there because he died, but there were only 16 people. When Le Corbusier finished, there were 6 people. Jose Uberi tells me the stories. There were 6 people. I mean, the idea that you have to have an office with 350 people to make architecture, I don't think that's probably what's wrong, is architecture became too commercial. And I think to recalibrate it, to get art, music, to get it re-related, you can't have that kind of a firm. The overhead of a firm like that is too high to even think about art.
I see the students that graduate from Princeton, and I see that they go in all different directions. Architecture is just one of the directions that they choose to go in. Some of them they become educators, some of them are curators, or they write, or they do digital work or something. I can't really, I have to say that my own work, my own practice is very interdisciplinary. We're always working on independent projects as we're working on more client oriented projects. So at any given time, there may be 4 or 5 different independent projects going. And I feel very strongly that I don't know life any other way. This is just the way I do it. And I don't see, I see the same kind of intellectual energy going into an independent project, an opera, or an exhibition or an installation as a building. But I can't really say that architects should do that. I think everyone is very, very different. And when in my teaching, I actually try to, I think that maybe as a role model, people see that I do, and my firm and Rick in collaboration, that we do very different kinds of things, including architecture. And the students, try to be artists all the time, and I actually take the other position. I feel like when I'm teaching, I have to make sure that students really understand how to make a plan in this section and how to plan a building. And, don't do that. Don't even try to do that unless you actually know your skills. And so I feel very strongly about that, because architecture is a discipline with a history and very specific skills and ways of communicating. And then, when you get to be expert, then you can put a lot of things together, or you could have parallel tracks.
Now that you are here together, you mentioned that you know each other so well, but you don't have time to have a conversation. Now that we have you here together, is there a question not related to projects that you would like to ask each other?
I would say, Liz, in 1979, I felt that your sense of conceptual art, the direction that you were moving was fascinating. And then in recent years, one of my favorite things that you did was the opera on the High Line. Don't you think there's a part of you that wants to kind of return to that artist dimension?
Yeah, that project.
Great question. Thank you.
That project was very, very important to me, and it came out of the change and the transformation from the High Line as being this sort of wonderful place, independent, autonomous, place in New York that was sort of dissident. It wasn't like a typical park, but how it changed and all this real estate, happened around it. So the piece was really a kind of, it was. I wanted to do an epic piece on the site where it happened. That was on the High Line, and not that it wouldn't have happened without the High Line, but the High Line helped it happen. And how do we think about our work, in a post-occupancy way? Like we do our work, and then, oh my God, it's victims of our own success. So the Malong Opera was a response to that, and it was 1,000 singers, and this was extremely important. I won't go into it, but I would say that it continues. That spirit continues in our work. It never leaves. It never changes. There's always a different project that's an obsession. I wanted to ask you a question specifically. Now that I probably have many questions, and it would take a couple of drinks to really get to the bottom of. But one thing that I showed your project from '79, exactly that time on the High Line, and you showed yourself sitting on the High Line, and you competed for the High Line. We're competing against each other, and we won somehow. I don't know. We did the right thing in the right place by chance. We won, and we did it. And I always felt this overwhelming sense of guilt about that. So one, will you forgive us? And two,
no,
did we do any justice to it?
Absolutely no. I have never, ever, you don't know this story, and I don't think I should tell it in public, but I know why we lost. It was because of the landscape architect, and one of the jury members had a terrible relationship, and I didn't realize that. And I realized it as soon as we walked into the interview. So I never felt bad. In fact, I felt good when you achieved it, because like I say, I walk on that in the morning when it's not crowded. I walk on it on my way to work, when I'm back in the city. So I've never had any feelings what's interesting is, like, Zaha and I competed against each other through her whole life. And at the end of a competition, if I won, she'd send me an email. Congratulations, Stevie Wonder. She called me Stevie Wonder. And then when she won, which was most of the time, I would send her a congratulations email. So I should have, maybe I didn't send you an email. I should have sent you a congratulations email.
No, but I think it's sort of co-owned in a way, because you had the first inspiration. I think that when I was in school, it was given as a project. It was like when I was teaching, when I was back in teaching, lots of educators gave the High Line as a project because you put it into people's imaginations, and no one would imagine like proposing to do something on this piece of industrial wasted, railway. And so, I if it wasn't for that project, I'm not sure that all of this would have happened. So that
we worked on it for years, with Peter Oblitz. I don't know if you remember him.
Yeah.
I worked on it. I went to community meetings. I worked on it for years. And when Giuliani signed the demolition order, I thought it was all over. And then Michael Bloomberg came in. Amanda Burden was his director of programs. And the day that he came into office, he tore up the demolition order. And I knew that the whole thing then had a chance, but I worked on it for years. I mean, I
have a real question, Stephen. Like, this is a real question that I wanted to ask you someday, but I never had the chance. Did you really purchase it for $1?
No.
Okay.
I think that was, that was coming from Peter Oblitz. That he and I, we would meet, and then he tried to purchase it for $1 or something like that. I don't know, but I was involved, and then he was kind of over the top. So, and I'm not very good in community meetings, but we did an analysis of the structure, proving that it was like 50 times stronger than it needed to be for pedestrians. And we had engineers involved. I worked on it for. So I was so happy that it was saved, and then finally they saved the other link now, right? The link, it connects to the bottom of my office, the building that my office is in. So I'm always grateful. So never had one moment of,
so nice.
It's been a great thing.
Let me ask you one question from the audience, which is, which routines help you better to work best, thinking in terms of work-life balance?
For me, it's drawing every morning, drawing and painting every morning. That's my routine that I do, my little watercolor, these little watercolor tablets. I mean, for me, this routine every day keeps me sane. It's like a prayer. And usually it's inside of a space or a building. And that keeps me always feeling good, because before breakfast, I've already done something.
Yeah, my routine is, I have none, and I don't have good advice for your audience member, because I do emails till 3 a.m. and I get up really, but the best hours for me are maybe 6 a.m. till 8, until people start to bug me, from the studio. So those couple of hours are very precious. But I would, I would say to my staff, keep that balance, to go to museums and read and really just absorb things that are happening around you. And today it's just really understanding. There's so many issues outside of architecture. I'm totally against the notion of autonomy in architecture, which was something that so many architects felt that architecture was somehow so important, self-important, and independent from everything else. Architecture is connected to everything, so stay connected to everything.
And how do you deal with the? We have talked about competitions, and maybe you won this time, you win this time, and next time you don't win. How do you deal with the feeling and knowing that some nice project could have been built, but they didn't happen at the end? Of course, so we all know your build projects, but we rarely know what it could be. How do you deal with this feeling?
I think I've won more against Liz than she's won against me, so I'm very happy about it.
Yeah, I'm used to losing a lot.
We built the Kennedy Center, right?
Yes, yes.
And you know what? The working drawings are done for the UCD, Dublin, University of Dublin, the architecture building and engineering building. The working drawings are done, and they're supposed to break ground in September. That was a nice competition.
Wow.
Yeah, Stephen has a very good track record. And it's hard to beat it. But my answer to that question is that when we lose a competition, at the beginning of my career, it was heartbreaking every single time, because you fall in love with what you're doing, and it's like losing a lover. It really hurts you emotionally. But I realized over time that every project that you do, whether it's built or unbuilt, is part of your work. It's already part of you, and it somehow comes out in the next projects. It doesn't go away.
Right.
So I think for you, Stephen, the same. I see you nodding. It's somehow you don't really feel that it's gone.
I'm nodding to the feeling of depression when you lose, because this past year, we lost 5 competitions in a row. Can you imagine? I mean, it's been devastating. It's a hard enough thing with the COVID and all of that. And then these juries, the juries are not, the Zoom juries are not very nice, you know, and they give you 15 minutes. You work 4 months on a project and they give you 15 minutes to present it on Zoom, you know, come on. That's really unfair, you know. So I've had you know, sort of 5 blows, but it's nice to have a meeting like this because you think about the bigger picture, you know, the whole going on for years.
Yeah.
Actually, I would like to end with one very quick last question regarding what you enjoy the most of your everyday life. So what is it that you say, yeah, it's hard, but I love it, and it is worth it?
I enjoy
Liz,
painting. I enjoy painting and drawing, and I enjoy the fact that when I start, I don't even know what I'm going to do. And I can remember getting up in the morning after one of those terrible dinners where they make you stay too late and you drink too much, and you get up and you feel kind of awful. And I force myself to make a painting, make a drawings and a watercolor, and I'm excited and surprised by the result. And that's like, to me, it's like deep enjoyment. I don't know, it's hard to explain. It's you're making something, you know, you know, I mean, certainly when you work on a building for 5, 6, 7 years and you realize that that's a joy, but you can't get that every 7 or 8 years. So like a daily joy of making on the drawing pad on a watercolor pad is, for me, that's the best.
What about you, Liz?
Yeah, for me, there may be 2 things. I mean, I've learned since COVID, I've learned how to cook. So I do like to experiment with some cooking. But one thing that I do, because my days are very stressful and they're not very controllable, at one point in the evening, I turn on TV and I watch C-SPAN. You know, and I don't know if Stephen knows what it's like. It's a TV channel that's just like surveillance. You know, it's like an observation of the Capitol and, you know, what's going on in the Senate, and you just watch it, and it's one position, and there's no. It's like watching. It's like looking into a fireplace. It's very soothing, and I like to do this because it's some people will take alcohol. I don't do that. But I do this and it calms me down and it gets all of the poisons out of my brain. And then I can be more creative and work.
Hey, Liz, can I make a recommendation, Liz?
Yeah.
There's another program that I watch in the morning called Dinosaur Train. You should try that.
You have to watch it because of your daughter.
Yeah. Oh, she knows the name of every dinosaur. But you know what? It's an educational cartoon. And it's really good, actually.
Okay, I wrote it down. Thank you.
Dinosaur Train.
I'll let you know tomorrow.
It has been a huge pleasure to have you here together. We wish we could have this in the future in a real auditorium. But it has been fantastic to be able to chat with you with this relaxed conversation. It was wonderful. I would like also to thank our partners, Skyframe and Mosa, but also the whole audience. We have participants from about 3,000 participants from over 90 countries, which is crazy. And this is not because of Architects Not Architecture, this is because of you. So thank you a lot for participating, and hopefully we can do it in the future in a real auditorium and enjoy a glass of wine together. Thank you a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Stephen. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.